Good morning. Appreciate all of you being here on this very brisk day. The reason for the gathering is related to the formerly called the Love, Jazz, and Arts. I'm Preston Love Jr., Preston Jr., and I have a statement to make, and Shirley would be available for questions. Is everybody ready to go? Very good. Well, good morning. As many of you know, the 24th and Lake Street area of our city is an area that chose to honor the legacy of my late father, Preston Love Sr., as I point to the street sign in his name. In addition, street sign along 24th Street corridor on this day reflect not only my father, but also Bertha Calloway, who is the founder of the Great Plains Black History Museum. And also the North Omaha signage reflects the influence of jazz music and history along the way. And my dad, of course, was a member of the National Jazz Hall of Fame. And not only that, but may I take a moment and introduce you or reintroduce you to North Omaha 2021. To the west, we have a wonderful development, the Highlander, which includes Big Mama's new restaurant and location. To the northwest, we have the revitalized Malcolm X Foundation and its site and great potential. To the east of us, we have a number of historical black churches. In this general area here, there are a number of them. To the south, from 24th Street, from this corner, looking north, we have Emery's Cafe and retail stores that are part of the Fair Deal complex. And as we move north from there, we have the new Great Plains Black History Museum and its fluid exhibits. And across the street from there, we have the historic African American newspaper called the Omaha Star. And we surely want to recognize some of the employees of the Star I see here today. Further north, we have the Cultural House, where you can find the expressions of our new generation in the arts and African American culture. And then on this corner, we have the well-funded Union for Contemporary Arts. And we have the Revive Center, which is across the street, which is where the Empowerment Network has its headquarters. And right here up the street, we have the new and exciting venture for a community-owned black bank. Also, my office, Black Votes Matter, is right here, and the iconic Elks Club is on this corner. And right here on this corner is the space that formerly housed the Love, Jazz, and Arts Center, and now begs to be affirmed to take its place among this historical backdrop. What we have the potential on this corner is to be the hub of all the things I just mentioned, and to showcase our culture and our history and our wonderful, wonderful assets. Let me introduce you, of sorts, to some of the community assets that we have produced. Notably, she's not here, but my sister Portia Love, who is a published author and a fortress in the written word and spoken word. My brother Norman Love, who is known nationally as a premier jazz soloist. and my brother Richie, whose recent CD has been #1 for over a year for the release most requested on the smooth jazz sites, and who recently was elected to the Nebraska Music Hall of Fame. And I have nephews who are part of the young wave of musicians and who are part of a whole new generation of expert musicians who are emerging and playing locally and in black churches. And so may I say that this community has a reservoir of music assets and otherwise. With me today are several people who represent, some of them are not here probably because of the weather, but who represent a large reservoir of musicians and artists of all sorts. I see some representatives here that represent many of them. I spoke with a number of them yesterday evening as they voiced their support of whatever I had to say. And many of them are chomping at the bit to get back to work after COVID and to show their talents and perform and to work with our youth. May I also introduce Dolores Matthews. Dolores, come stand with me for a moment. Dolores Matthews is an accomplished musician and teacher who has mastered the programming to teach our youth to perform. Doris, I have the mic on me, but could you just say quickly, just a quick list of the things that you are a master of and what you do with our children?
Thank you, Preston. It's good to be here today. What I just would like to say is that I do teach piano, I teach voice, I teach violin, I teach drama, and I do this with the with the Nebraska Arts Council as well as Arts for All. And I've traveled throughout this country and outside, and the majority of the talent that I've seen is right here, and we have nowhere to develop them. They get developed other places and they stay there. I'd like to see it happen here, and our talent that's here be nurtured to where it's great right here.
Thank you. Thank you, Doris Matthews. And may I say that my point that I'm trying to make is not only physically the area and all these iconic new growth and excitement in this community, but we have the assets of people, culturally, talent-wise. And I may also go so far as to say that this corner is hallowed ground. And it needs to have the best of what this community has to offer to audiences and to our youth. I share this background to highlight the basis of my interest in becoming the proprietor of the space that was called the Love Jazz and Art Center at 2510 North 24th Street. The city of Omaha charged the BID, the Business Improvement District for this corridor, with the task of determining a new entity to function as landlord, and I underline landlord, not to manage and not to program the space. I am profoundly disappointed and shocked in the aspects and the processes and the role of the city and the BID as to the final selection made. May I add that my disappointment pales to the fact that it's also embedded in those processes, and the decision is the diminishing of my father's legacy, Preston Love Jr., who helped make this corner what it is, and whose name rises above and looks down on these decisions. I stand today to make three simple points. One, is I love my community, North Omaha, and have been a tireless proponent and servant for the further development, improvement, and growth before, way before, and since I moved back in 2006. I have worked and want this community to thrive and flourish, and I realize that an ugly public argument over this issue of the choice of the proprietor is counterproductive, and to this community in general, counterproductive, and to the children that we want to grow specifically. Before, number two, the city and the BID made the decision not to activate my vision for the space. Before all of that, I spent a great amount of time and effort, to some degree money, to work out a vision and specific programmatic thrust for this corner about our African American culture in all of its pieces, and had begun to collaborate with Doris Matthews and so many of the other artists who were to bring their assets and their talent to this corner to become the hub of all the things that I mentioned, and not only the hub, but the sizzle. So I say, who better than I to do this? And so, in spite of that, I believe that God has directed me, after much prayer and soul searching, to accept the decisions made by the city and the BID board. I am convinced God has a plan, and His will always prevail. My prayer is that those who live and work in this community embrace the idea that the welfare of the whole is important and way more important than the desires of a few. We must resist the impulses that tend to divide us and let God fix it. Number three, I say that this process and interaction with the city and the BID should be a reminder to this community that for the development of our community and its assets, it should remain in control of the integrity, the culture, and the history should remain in the control of the community. Support from the city? Yeah. So aid from the city? Of course. But control? Absolutely not. And so I'm saying to my community, let this be a lesson, a moment of lesson for this community as to losing control of what happens to our history and our culture and our development. I remain committed to the community. It's a wonderful asset. And history and culture. And I stand today not only to speak to my community about controlling its own destiny, but I speak to the city, citywide, and say that North Omaha could use comprehensive support for our growth and affirming our history and culture. So we need comprehensive support and equity and inclusion. I say that to the rest of us. I pray that the choices made for this space by the city and the BID can have a positive impact on the growth of North Room Hall and their efforts, and I say Godspeed. I surely want to recognize members of my church family, my bishop, Bishop Ford, Elder Parker, let me just confess to you all in front of all of you, my boss, my wife, my sister, Karen Davis, and I don't know, Pastor Williams, am I leaving anybody? And many others who called and voiced their inability to be here, but are supportive and have been. It's been a tremendous response to my response, and I surely will be available to answer any questions.
The name, Love.
The Love, Jazz, and Art Center will go away. It surely cannot be used by any new proprietor of the space. I started assuming that I was going to get the decision, since we've been working together for 9 months with the city and the BID. And then in the last 30 days, it got more complex and a little deep. But during that time, I opened up a new corporation called the Preston Love Senior African American Cultural Center. I opened up a bank account at the Legacy Bank here and got my federal ID. In other words, we were moving and organizing, getting ready, but the name Love will not be used in any way in this facility as it stands right now.
Has the Love family ever been involved in any of the goings on at the center? Well,
it's kind of breaking news to some of you, but the Love Center was founded at the death of my father in 2004. It was founded in 4 or 5, and never in its history was the Love family welcome to this space. Never. Never as a board member, an advisor, operationally. And so, with a bitter pill, most of the family decided to support it anyway, for the good of the community and the good of the legacy of my dad. And so, it's a curious piece of the history, and the reason why I began to talk with the city and then later the BID about occupying this space and opening up a new chapter with all the things that I've mentioned. Venues for upscale weddings and church events and jazz, and teaching our kids with Miss Matthews and working with all of the other awesome artists and all the assets that we have in this community. Some working and some not, but we're going to activate them right here. So that's a long answer to your question, but no, the Love family has not been welcome. And when the choice came by the city to close the center as it was, I did not object. And part of my reason was that I will have a chance to start a new chapter.
What's going to change? Mr. Love told me I was quite a good fighter and stood beside you. What's going to change this time with the city and the BID? Because I've seen BIDs worthy in other parts of the city, which I'm still trying to have a real understanding. What is it going to do for North Omaha, this ground, hollow ground?
Yeah.
We have a little to know.
The question, if I could repeat it because they probably didn't pick it up, was what is this BID going to do about the development of this community? Is that correct? My answer is I am have been very enthusiastic, very supportive of activities of a business improvement district for this corridor. To do the things that they do, to beautify, to work on infrastructure, and to be agents to seek businesses and small businesses to go up and down this corridor. But what they should not do, and what they did in this case, is they began to get from looking at overseeing the development of the street into trying to operate a facility. They received $50,000 from the turnback tax to hire a program manager. You don't hire a program manager for a BID. And that program manager turned out to be the person that they chose. That doesn't make any BID sense. And so, if it doesn't make any BID sense, it doesn't make any sense to me either. And so, the BID has great potential, but they need to stay focused on becoming a business improvement district and not trying to work with the city to try to control our culture and our history and our deliverances. Yes, sir.
Are you clear of the BID's charter more than beautification?
I'm clear on the beautification part of the charter. I'm not clear on the other parts.
A little bit surprised because of the historical significance that you've already outlined, particularly as it applies to the building and the naming of the building by your father, and who is the foundation of the used to be musical culture of this community. Like I said, I personally am a little bit surprised that you taking this the way that you are. I can understand that the unification and the development must go on, but the pure fact alone that this building is the last remnant of that cultural personification, and them doing it overtly like that shows that, to me, it's a more of a stripping away of the cultural significance and putting it more in the gentrification concepts that have taken over this community already.
It has that potential, sir. And I think part of your question is you're surprised at my reaction to it. And my reaction to it is this, is that, believe it or not, I've prayed about it, and I feel that the Lord will fix it. And that arguing with the city and the BID will serve no immediate purpose, but that these things will work themselves out. The community will speak on this as well, and so we'll have to see how it works out. But I, as now a man of God, don't feel comfortable with becoming an angry man in this context, because I know things will work themselves out.
Now follow up?
Yes, sir.
One of the major difficulties that this community has suffered is because of the pandemic. And one of the statements of the pandemic, and I equate this to the spirituality of it, one of the conclusions of that is that our pre-existing condition as a people has weakened us to make us more receptible to these kinds of afflictions.
Yes, sir.
This is probably one of the most devastating parts of the development of this area. And I would hope that the spiritual pre-existing condition does not allow for us to really see the essence of what is happening to this community and its history in the way that it has been depicted as it applies to music, jazz, and culture.
Well, one, well stated, but I want to say one of the reasons for me to call the media is to educate the community on these things that we take for granted everybody knows. And so my purpose is to explain and to report on this happening for whatever the good, the bad, and the ugly part of this, but also for learning lessons as we move forward in some of the things that you mentioned. I would acknowledge the presence of Terry Sanders, who is the currently the publisher and editor of the Omaha Star. I gave great accolades to the historical value of our paper. Yes, ma'am.
Would it be fair to say that your plans included a timeline, infrastructure, budgets, and program, personnel, and other organizations, like in-depth plans that you had for this space prior to the BID announcing their plans?
Yeah, it not only would be fair, but it also be true. Spent a lot of time developing the timeline, beginning to raise money, doing the things you have to do to start a new chapter of a new exciting venture. So yes, we did all of that work before we were surprised by the process and then the decision, and that's why there is uncomfortableness about that.
If there is, first, I'm an outsider looking in Omaha. I mean, I'm born here, I'm raised here, and I moved here to the territory because I love Omaha. Okay, one of the things we are lacking right here, right now, in North Omaha, we do not have a leader per se to speak for North Omaha in general, because there is a lot of need for places like this and for the business community, which we don't have that now. We don't have
Thanks.
no
You get all
one
your
to
questions
speak
answered.
for North Omaha.
You let the cameras know that. So I appreciate that. You look like, I don't know what you do, sir, but you look like you could be a contractor.
You know,
Preston,
Yes, sir.
was there a reason what the city gave you about not going with your guys'
Well,
plan?
very. It's a hard thing to answer emotionally, because at the moment of this decision was the same time frame as the death of the mayor's husband, and I chose not to speak up publicly at that moment because of all of that. But I can say this, that all during that period, I made calls to the mayor's deputy chief of staff, I should say, Marty Bleeland. And Marty told me that he would get back to me of what the city's role was in this decision. Marty has not gotten back to me. And I have placed 3 other calls to him, trying not to worry the mayor about this. And quite frankly, I feel disrespected there also. No calls back, no perspective on what the city feels about this and how and what role they play. Because there's all kinds of conspiracy theories, some of which may be true. But I'm not ready to do that until I hear straight talk from the city, and I have not.
First, you have so is the city taking over this building for redevelopment?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Is the city taking over this building for redevelopment? What's going on with this
Okay,
building?
what specifically? The city owns the building, and the most of the work that put together the original Love Jazz and Art Center was done with community development block grant money. And so, but the city owns the building. And so somewhere along the line, the city decided to really ask me, as well as ask the BID, they started with the BID and said, would it be, they wanted to put the BID in charge of the space and then occupy some of the space. I didn't really think that was a great idea, but I didn't have a problem with it. Because as far as I was concerned, I would run the Love Center, the new chapter, and slip my rent underneath the door and leave me alone. And I told them that just like I'm telling you. But they got to the point where the city and the BID curiously wanted to run the thing and control the thing, and we began to butt heads. But they never gave me an indication that that was going to be a decision criteria. That's why. But they own the building, to answer your question. And I don't know what the city wants to do, because now it's curious what they really want to do with the space. Because they had an opportunity, a great opportunity, to do the visionary things that I've described to you. And so not to do that speaks to something else they want to do. And that's curious. I don't know the answer.
So is this going to take effect immediately, or when is this going to take effect?
Well, they made their decision. They had press conferences. Some of you may have covered it. They walked around and paraded around and said, "This is what we're going to do." And but there is going to be, part of your question, is the city had committed that they were going to do improvements to the facility, clean it up a little bit, and they were going to reconstruct it a little bit to allow them to coexist with the proprietor of the space for programming for what I say. So they would have to do some things, and the city had committed to federal money, albeit, to make those improvements. So the answer to your question, when all of that's said and done, it probably will be fall. My timetable was to put it on high priority, because in this community, as all the people standing behind me will testify, we have a series of things that are going to begin to happen. In the mid-June, we're going to have Juneteenth, followed by step-up program, in which we were going to be programmed on that. Following that, we were going to have Omaha Days, where we're going to have thousands of Native Omahans coming back. Following that, we were going to have Christmas in the Village and Kwanzaa and other holiday things. So that timetable made sense. And so the timetable that they're looking at now is slow walking. And for whatever reason, I don't know.
Is there any possibility to move it elsewhere?
My vision?
Yeah.
But there, Samari, the question is there any possibility of me taking my vision and my dad's legacy and all of that elsewhere? And the answer is, if he'd asked me this 2 months ago, I'd say absolutely not. But if he asked me today, I'm saying we're looking at it. And guess what? Not only are we looking at it, people are knocking on the door saying, let's take this to another spot. But I do want to stay in the corridor, if I may, or close to it, for cultural reasons. We have so many artists that we can activate if we do that. All of the talents of Arts for Everyone, Arts for All, and many, many other groups that are ready to go. If I do that, so we're looking at it.
That's all I got.
Thank you all so much for coming.